The creature lay sprawled across the floor of the medical bay, massive ribs rising and falling in uneven breaths. Thick, dark blood oozed from a wound along its flank, pooling beneath its matted fur. The medical team stood at a wary distance, their eyes darting between the injured beast and the human crouching beside it. Dr. Henry Calloway ran a hand through his short, sweat-dampened hair, his other hand resting lightly on the creature's heaving side. "She's more scared than you are," he murmured, glancing up at the assembled aliens. "I need saline, antiseptic, and a proper set of sutures." No one moved. Commander Vrix, a tall, insectoid being with iridescent exoskeletal plates, took half a step forward before stopping. "Human, that thing could crush you." His mandibles clicked together in unease. Henry exhaled through his nose. "Yeah, well, if we don't help her, she's gonna die, and I don't like losing patients." The creature let out a low, shuddering growl, her dark eyes flicking toward Henry. He could see the terror in her gaze, the way her muscles bunched under her thick hide, ready to lash out if she felt threatened. "She's losing too much blood," Henry said, pressing a clean cloth against the wound. "Someone hand me a clotting agent before she bleeds out on your floor." Still, no one moved. Henry clenched his jaw. "Fine, I'll do it myself." He reached for his med pack, grimacing as he rummaged through supplies. His hands worked quickly, pouring disinfectant over the wound. The creature hissed, muscles tensing, but Henry didn't stop. "I know it burns, girl, but we gotta keep this clean." Vrix shifted uneasily. "You treat animals like this often?" Henry laughed under his breath. "I'm a vet. I've treated creatures twice her size back on Earth." He reached for a syringe, filling it with a painkiller. This should help. The beast let out a whimper as he injected the medication near the wound, but her body soon relaxed. Henry took the opportunity to examine the damage, deep, jagged, likely from a plasma blade. The edges of the wound were charred, making stitching tricky. "Someone grab a cauterizer," he called. Silence. Henry turned his head. "Seriously?" Rick's mandibles twitched. "No one here is willing to get close. That thing is dangerous." Henry let out a slow breath. "She's in pain. She's not going to hurt anyone unless you give her a reason to." He glanced down, stroking the beast's thick fur. "Aren't you, girl?" The creature let out a low, tired exhale. Henry shook his head and pulled out a portable cauterizer from his own kit. "Guess I'll keep doing all the work, then." He pressed the device to the wound and the creature let out a sharp yelp, her body jerking. Henry barely managed to keep her still, murmuring reassurances as he worked. The scent of burned flesh filled the air. Vrix took another step forward, watching carefully. "You're not afraid of pain, are you?" Henry wiped sweat from his forehead. "Of course I am, but I'd rather push through it than let her suffer longer than she has to." The alien warriors exchanged glances, their antennae twitching in what Henry could only assume was uncertainty. "All right," he muttered, grabbing a suture needle. "Time to stitch you up." He worked with steady hands, ignoring the way his back ached from crouching so long. The creature remained still, aside from the occasional whimper, her breathing growing steadier. After what felt like an eternity, Henry tied off the last stitch. He ran a hand over her side, checking for any other wounds. "She'll need antibiotics," he said, "and rest." He looked up. "So, which one of you wants to help me move her somewhere safe?" Silence. Then, slowly, Vic stepped forward. "I will assist," he said. Henry nodded. "Good. Let's get her somewhere comfortable." He placed a hand on the creature's head, giving it a reassuring pat. "See? Told you we'd take care of you." The beast let out a soft, exhausted sigh. The creature had been moved to a quieter section of the medical bay, away from the wary eyes of the crew. Henry sat cross-legged beside her on the floor, checking the slow rise and fall of her chest. Her body was still tense, her ears twitching at every distant sound. Vrick stood near the doorway, arms crossed. His antennae flicked forward before he spoke. "She remains alert." "Of course she does," Henry said, adjusting the makeshift bandage over the sutures. "She's in an unfamiliar place, surrounded by people who smell like fear. She's waiting for something to go wrong." The alien tilted his head. You assume she is aware of her vulnerability. Henry glanced up. She's a living thing, isn't she? You don't have to be sentient to know what it feels like to be at someone's mercy. Vix was silent for a moment, then stepped forward cautiously. Her kind is not native to my sector. We do not know what sustenance she requires, nor how she reacts to prolonged sedation. Then we figure it out, Henry said. He reached for his medkit and pulled out a scanner. I'll monitor her vitals, see how her body processes the painkillers. He ran the device along her flank, watching the readings. Heart rate's stabilizing, but she's still weak. She needs fluids. Vrix hesitated. We have hydration compounds, but they are formulated for our physiology. Henry exhaled sharply through his nose. Then get me the baseline components, water, electrolytes. I can adjust it manually. Vix gave a short nod and left. Henry turned his attention back to the creature, carefully pressing along her ribs. She let out a soft whine, but didn't flinch away. That's it, girl, he murmured. You're holding up. Minutes later, Vrix returned, carrying a tray of supplies. He set them down beside Henry, watching as the human mixed the components, adjusting ratios with practiced efficiency. You do not hesitate, Vix observed. Henry didn't look up. If I waste time second-guessing, she suffers longer. He filled a syringe with the rehydration solution. Hold her head up, gently. Brix hesitated before kneeling beside Henry. His clawed hands moved with careful precision, supporting the beast's massive skull. Henry inserted the syringe between her teeth, pressing the plunger slowly. The creature swallowed weakly. Henry waited, watching for signs of distress. When none came, he prepared another dose. She accepts it, Vrix noted. Henry nodded. Good, means we're not poisoning her. The alien warrior studied Henry's focused expression. Your kind is known for persistence, but I did not expect such personal investment. Henry gave a small shrug. If you're going to help something, you commit. Half measures don't save lives. Brix was quiet for a moment. Your approach is unlike ours. Yeah, well, Henry said, setting the syringe aside. She doesn't need an approach. She needs care. The creature exhaled, her body relaxing slightly. Henry ran a hand over her fur, checking for heat or swelling. Vrix watched. You are thorough. Henry glanced up. She's not out of danger yet. The alien gave a slow nod. Then we continue. Henry returned his attention to the beast, already calculating the next steps in his mind. Hours passed in measured increments, marked by the rhythmic beeping of the monitoring equipment Henry had rigged together from the alien medbay's supplies. The creature's breathing had steadied, but her body remained tense, her ears flicking at the slightest shift in the room. She wasn't out of danger yet. Henry adjusted the IV drip, watching as the hydration solution slowly disappeared into her system. He wiped his hands on his trousers, stretching his shoulders before glancing at Vrix, who stood at the edge of the room, his posture unreadable. You're still here, Henry noted. Vrix's antennae twitched. It would be irresponsible to leave you unobserved. The likelihood of injury remains high. Henry scoffed, shaking his head. I appreciate the concern, but I've got a better chance of getting hurt tripping over my own feet than from her right now. He gestured to the creature. She's conserving energy. Body's in recovery mode. Vrix stepped closer, his mandibles clicking softly. Your confidence in your assessment is notable. Henry rolled his eyes. It's not confidence, it's experience. He crouched beside the beast, checking the sutures for any signs of stress. The wound was holding, though light swelling had begun to form around the stitched edges. Not ideal, but not unexpected either. He turned toward the supply tray, selecting a small vial. She's building some inflammation around the wound. I need an anti-inflammatory that won't wreck her kidneys. Vrix hesitated before retrieving a tablet from the medstation's interface, scanning through what Henry assumed were the ship's pharmaceutical records. The alien warrior's eyes flicked between the data and Henry's hands as the human measured out a dose from his own limited supply. Vix finally spoke. Our medical protocols do not account for unknown physiology. How do you determine what is safe? Henry filled a syringe, tapping it lightly before responding. You start with the basics: hydration, stabilization, minimizing pain. Then you work up from there, adjusting as the body responds. He pressed the syringe against the creature's skin, injecting the medication. You don't need a perfect map to know which direction to take first. Vrix observed the process in silence, his gaze lingering on the way Henry's fingers moved with practiced precision. Minutes passed. The creature's breathing grew deeper, her muscles loosening slightly. Henry pressed the back of his hand against her side, feeling the subtle warmth of her body. Not feverish, but still hovering on the edge of concern. She's still metabolizing the painkillers. Slower than I'd like, Henry muttered. Could be a difference in liver function. I don't want to overload her system, so we'll space out the next dose. Vrix considered this. You rely on observation more than diagnostic tools? Henry huffed a tired laugh. Observation is a diagnostic tool. You can run all the tests in the galaxy, but if you don't pay attention to the patient in front of you, you'll miss something important. Vrix shifted slightly. This methodology is less, he paused, searching for the word, quantifiable than what we are accustomed to. Henry shrugged. Medicine isn't just numbers, it's patterns, instincts, knowing when to wait and when to act. He glanced at the creature, and right now, we wait. The alien warrior studied Henry for a long moment before finally settling into a seat near the wall. Neither of them spoke as the hours stretched on, the quiet filled only by the steady sounds of the creature's breathing. The medbay's artificial lighting dimmed slightly, signaling the ship's transition into rest cycles. Henry barely noticed. He sat cross-legged beside the creature, his fingers lightly tapping against the edge of his knee as he monitored her breathing. The earlier swelling had subsided slightly, but her body still held a stiffness he didn't like. Vrix remained nearby, his posture rigid but attentive. His eyes followed Henry's movements, though he kept a respectful distance. Henry exhaled sharply, rubbing at the back of his neck. She's metabolizing the fluids better than I expected, but we're not out of the woods yet. I need to see how her body handles food. He gestured at the tray of supplies Vrix had retrieved earlier. Anything remotely close to protein paste in there? Vrix sifted through the options before selecting a packet. This is the most nutrient-dense option available. It is formulated for varied species, though its digestibility is uncertain. Henry took it, inspecting the label even though the alien script meant nothing to him. He tore a small corner off, taking a cautious sniff. The scent was faintly metallic, but not aggressively unpalatable. He squeezed a tiny portion onto his fingertip and held it near the creature's snout. She didn't react at first. Her body remained still, save for the slow rise and fall of her chest. Then, after a few moments, her nostrils flared and her tongue flicked out briefly against the offered food. Henry waited. A second passed, then another. Finally, she made a small sound deep in her throat and took the tiniest bite. Vrix observed intently. She accepts nourishment. Henry nodded. That's a good sign. Means her digestive system isn't shutting down. He squeezed out another small portion, offering it again. This time, she took it with slightly more interest. Vrix's antennae twitched. You approach feeding with the same patience as treatment. Henry didn't look up. No point in rushing. If she eats too fast or too much, she could vomit or go into distress. Slow and steady. The creature swallowed, then rested her head back down. Henry didn't push for more. That's enough for now. I'll wait a few hours and see how she reacts before trying again. Vrix considered this. You do not assume success immediately. Henry let out a short breath. Nothing about medicine is immediate. Everything's a wait-and-see game. He leaned back on his hands. Her body's been through trauma. Even if the wound heals, there's still internal stress. I need to make sure her systems are recovering in sync. Vrix's gaze lingered on Henry for a moment before he spoke again. Your approach is methodical but adaptable. Henry glanced at him. That's just a fancy way of saying, I make things up as I go. The alien tilted his head. Yet your improvisation is effective. Henry shrugged. Veterinary medicine isn't an exact science, especially when you're dealing with unknown species. You learn to work with what you have. The ship's soft hum filled the silence between them. The creature's breathing remained steady, her body finally relaxing into something resembling sleep. Henry rolled his shoulders. I'll need to keep checking her vitals through the next few cycles. If her body responds well to the food, I can introduce more complex nutrients. He glanced at Vix. You planning on standing there all night? Vrix didn't answer immediately. Then, slowly, he sat down across from Henry. I will observe. Henry smirked slightly before turning his attention back to his patient. Suit yourself. The creature stirred, her muscles shifting under the thin blanket Henry had draped over her earlier. Her ears flicked, nostrils flaring slightly as she adjusted to the unfamiliar environment. Henry watched from his position on the floor, knees drawn up, exhaustion pressing at the edges of his awareness. He hadn't left her side in hours, unwilling to risk complications while the alien medbay's systems remained frustratingly inadequate for her physiology. Brick sat a short distance away, his posture as stiff as ever. The alien had remained a constant presence, though whether out of duty or curiosity, Henry couldn't say. The IV bag had nearly emptied. Henry checked the line, ensuring there were no obstructions before preparing a fresh solution. He worked methodically, securing the tubing with practiced efficiency. The creature's breathing remained even, though her eyes flickered open briefly, watching him. Vrix observed the exchange. She is becoming more aware. Henry nodded, adjusting the flow rate on the IV. That's a good thing. Means her system isn't shutting down. He reached for the scanner, running it along her side. The readings were within an acceptable range, though her energy levels remained low. We need to increase her caloric intake. She won't regain strength if she's only getting minimal nutrients. Vix gestured toward a selection of food packs he had gathered earlier. Which of these will suffice? Henry opened one experimentally, rubbing a small amount between his fingers. It was denser than the previous paste, but not overly fibrous. He considered its consistency before offering a tiny portion to the creature. She sniffed at it, hesitated, then took a tentative bite. Vrix studied her reaction. She does not reject it. Henry watched her chew slowly. That's a start. We don't know how well she'll digest it, but at least she's willing to eat. He set aside more, planning to space out the portions over the next few hours. Vrix shifted slightly. What is your assessment of her recovery? Henry exhaled, rubbing at his face. She's stable but not out of danger. If the wound site stays clean and she keeps eating, she'll improve. But if infection sets in, or if her system can't process the nutrients properly, things could go downhill fast. Vix's mandibles clicked in thought. You anticipate multiple outcomes. Henry gave a tired nod. That's how medicine works. You prepare for complications before they happen. He glanced toward the medbay's supply station. I need a more targeted antibiotic. The one I used earlier is broad spectrum, but if this species has any unusual bacterial resistance, it might not be enough. Vrix rose, moving toward the station's interface. I will retrieve available options. As the alien worked, Henry turned his attention back to the creature. He ran a careful hand along her side, feeling for any abnormalities in her musculature. She tolerated the contact, though her body remained tense. You're a fighter, he murmured. Just hold on a little longer. Vrix returned, placing a selection of vials beside Henry. These compounds are used for various species with differing microbiomes. Will any be suitable? Henry picked one up, studying the label. He ran a chemical breakdown scan, comparing it to what he knew of mammalian biology. One of the options looked promising. He measured out a cautious dose, injecting it into the IV line. Vrix observed. You commit to action quickly. Henry shrugged. If I hesitate, she suffers longer. I make the best call I can with the information I have. The creature let out a soft exhale, her body relaxing slightly. Henry leaned back, rolling his shoulders. Now we wait again. Vrix settled into a chair, his gaze lingering on the scene before him. You are unlike the physicians of my kind. Henry huffed a tired laugh. Yeah, I get that a lot. The creature shifted slightly, her ears flicking as she adjusted to the weight of wakefulness. Henry noted the subtle movement, eyes tracing the way her breathing had deepened since the last dose of antibiotics. Her body was responding, but the process remained delicate. He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. Vrix observed from his chair, his mandibles twitching in what Henry had come to recognize as contemplation. The alien finally spoke. "You have been monitoring her without cessation?" Henry exhaled through his nose. "That's kind of what doctors do." Brix tilted his head slightly. "Your methods are unorthodox. You rely on direct observation more than advanced diagnostics." Henry rolled his shoulders, feeling the stiff pull of exhaustion. "Machines are useful, but they don't tell you everything. You have to watch how the body reacts, how the patient responds. That's the difference between treating numbers and treating a living being." Vrix considered this. "You trust intuition?" Henry shook his head. "I trust experience. Intuition is just pattern recognition you don't consciously process. The more cases you see, the more connections your brain makes." He gestured toward the creature. Her body language, her breathing, the way her metabolism is adapting, all of that tells me more than any scanner ever could. Brick's posture remained rigid, but there was something thoughtful in the way his antennae shifted. "Your species is known for adaptability. I did not anticipate such an application in medicine." Henry huffed quietly. "That's because most people think of adaptability as throwing caution aside and rushing into things. But real adaptability is knowing when to be careful." The creature let out a slow, measured breath. Her skin no longer felt overheated beneath Henry's fingertips, and the swelling around the wound had receded further. He ran a careful hand along her side, checking for any lingering rigidity. Brix observed the gesture. "You assess through direct contact frequently." Henry nodded. "Touch tells you a lot: temperature, tension, hydration levels. It's a fundamental part of treating animals. They don't tell you what's wrong, so you have to figure it out through feel." Briggs' mandibles clicked softly. "Your patience is notable." Henry snorted. "I'd rather call it stubbornness." The alien warrior remained silent for a moment before shifting his gaze toward the monitoring equipment. "Her recovery appears to be progressing." Henry nodded. "Yeah, but she still needs time. The wound might be healing, but her body's been through hell. She needs rest, proper nutrition, and a stress-free environment." Vix's antennae twitched. "Such conditions may not be easily provided aboard this vessel." Henry sighed, rubbing at his face. "I figured as much, which means we need to figure out the next step." Rex's voice carried a hint of something unreadable. "You intend to ensure her survival beyond this moment?" Henry frowned. "Of course I do. I didn't go through all this just to have her relapse because she got dumped somewhere unsafe." The alien warrior regarded him carefully. "What do you propose?" Henry leaned back slightly, considering. "She needs an environment where she can recover properly. If this ship can't provide that, then we need to find somewhere that can." Vrix was silent for several seconds before finally speaking. "There is a facility on the outer rim of this sector. It specializes in rehabilitation for non-sentient species." Henry's brows lifted slightly. "And you're just now mentioning this?" Brick's mandibles shifted. "I was uncertain whether she would survive the initial treatment. I did not wish to offer a solution prematurely." Henry exhaled. "All right. Can we get her there?" Vrix gave a short nod. "It will require clearance, but I can arrange transport." Henry glanced down at the creature, watching as her breathing remained steady. He allowed himself the smallest sense of relief. "Good. Then let's make it happen." Vrix watched him for a long moment before standing. "I will initiate the necessary arrangements." Henry nodded, turning his attention back to his patient. The hardest part was over, but there was still work to be done. As VIS exited the med bay, Henry ran a reassuring hand along the creature's side. "You're going to be all right, girl, just a little longer." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. The rehabilitation facility had approved their request for transfer, but that didn't mean it would be simple. The creature was still weak, and moving her carried risks. Henry stood beside the medbay's examination table, watching as Vrix coordinated the logistics with the facility's staff via comms. The transport ship was already en route, equipped with a containment unit designed for large, recovering animals. Henry had insisted on staying with her during the transfer. He wasn't about to leave her side now. "Transport is inbound," Vrix announced, his mandibles clicking. "Arrival in 20 minutes. They have provided a stabilization chamber with monitored oxygen levels and temperature control." Henry nodded, pressing a hand lightly to the creature's side. She barely stirred, her body still exhausted from the fight to stay alive. "Good, I just need to make sure she stays calm during the move." Vrix hesitated. "She may react poorly to confinement." "Yeah, I know," Henry admitted, adjusting the IV drip to ensure she stayed hydrated for the trip. "But we don't have a choice. She's too weak to walk to the hangar on her own." The low hum of the transport ship's docking sequence vibrated through the floor. Henry glanced up as two medtechs entered, both dressed in neutral-colored uniforms with the facility's insignia. They carried a collapsible medical stretcher reinforced with stabilizing restraints. "She's in stable condition," one of them asked, a tall reptilian with dark, scaled skin. "As stable as she can be," Henry confirmed, stepping back to give them space. "She's responding to treatment, but she's still weak, no sudden movements. She's skittish." The second tech, a stocky humanoid with thick furred arms, adjusted the stretcher's controls. "We'll keep it smooth. You riding with us?" Henry shot them a look. "Like hell I'd let her go alone." The reptilian gave a slight nod. "Then, let's move." Working together, they carefully lifted the creature onto the stretcher. She stirred weakly, her ears twitching, but Henry kept a steady hand on her side, murmuring reassurances. The restraints adjusted automatically, securing her in place without pressing against her injuries. "Easy, girl," Henry murmured as they wheeled her toward the hangar. "We're almost there." Vrix followed beside him, his antennae flicking as he observed the process. "You are unusually invested in this." Henry let out a quiet huff. "She fought to survive. Least I can do is make sure she has a fighting chance at recovery." The journey to the transport ship was smooth, and within minutes they had her secured in the containment unit. The medtechs monitored her vitals as the ship lifted off, the artificial gravity keeping turbulence to a minimum. Henry stayed close, watching her breathing, ready to intervene if anything went wrong, but she remained still, her body finally able to rest. By the time they touched down at the rehabilitation center, Henry felt exhaustion creeping in, but he ignored it. He wasn't done yet. The facility was more open than he expected, spacious enclosures with natural terrain, clean air, and advanced medical stations. The team there was efficient, moving the creature into a monitored recovery space designed for her size and physiology. Henry stood at the edge of the enclosure as they settled her in, the tension in his chest slowly easing. "You did well," Vic said beside him. Henry exhaled. "We'll see. She still needs time, but at least now she has a real chance." And for the first time since this ordeal began, he felt like he could finally let go.